Welcome to the Liberal Conservative Report. My name is Zach Sacker. Many Americans are very unhappy with the options that the major parties have put forward for president. But there is good news. There is a third option, and she is here today to make the case. Dr. Jo Jorgensen is the Libertarian Party's nominee for president. Dr. Jorgensen, I'd like to start by asking what may come off as a boring question, but it's very important and critical to being able to earn enough support to become the 46th president of the United States. As I already said, many people are unhappy with Trump and Biden, but at the same time, many fear that a vote for a third party or independent candidate will just help elect the person that they like the least. How do you reassure these voters that you are not only the best candidate, but a viable candidate?
That most of the people in this country do not want government running their lives, that 40 to 45 million of people, or 40 to 45 million voters do lean libertarian. They do want control of their economic, their money. They also want control of their personal lives. And if those people all voted for what they really wanted, then we would make some headway. And I would suggest that basically voting for what you don't want is a waste. If you vote for either Trump or Biden, you have zero chance that we're going to bring the troops home, zero chance that you're going to have, that we're going to reduce the deficit, zero chance that your taxes are going to go down.
Yeah, totally agree. Thank you. Now, we've all seen the highly disturbing video of George Floyd's murder. Protesters have been in the streets ever since, chanting "No justice, no peace." It is clear to many that changes are needed. As president, what kind of reforms regarding policing would you push for, and how would you seek to heal our nation's racial divide?
Well, the biggest thing I would do is I would return the policing to where it belongs, at the local level. If you think about it, all crime is at the local level, whether it's burglary, robbery, assault, anything like that doesn't involve the federal government. So the police should be chosen and they should be run at a local level for each area. Now, what the government has done, the federal government, is they have basically militarized the police departments with tanks, aircraft, a lot of grenade launchers. And they've given them free training, and they've given them additional money to go out and buy additional equipment. And so what we have is a severe escalation, because when people have these things, they're more likely to use them. And here's what I'd like to point out is, let's say a local community had a referendum to say, hey, do you want your property taxes to go up because maybe we would like at a school gymnasium or at a park or something like that. Some people might say, sure, maybe raise my taxes for that. Other people might say no. But if you put on there, would you like your taxes raised so we can have a tank in the police department? Probably most people would vote no. I don't want my money to go for a tank. What are you talking about? But instead, the federal government takes that money from the citizens in the form of income tax, and then buys the tanks and buys the grenade launchers and so forth, and then goes back to the police departments and they kind of dangle it, hey, would you like a free tank? Well, who's going to say no? Because you look at it as these were, bought with your taxpayer money, and if you don't take the tank, somebody in another city or another state's going to take it. So what we have is just the federal government getting way too big and being where it shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I understand that you basically want local jurisdictions to make decisions regarding policing. Would you consider doing something like a mandate where police would have to use body cameras across the country? Or is that, again, just a decision that needs to be made at the local level?
I believe that should be made at the local level. But I would like to add, if there is something egregious, for instance, Governor Wallace standing on the steps of the university preventing blacks from entering as students, of course the federal government needs to get involved when people's rights are being violated. And also, if a governor were to come to me and say, hey, this is out of hand, we need your help, of course, I would give the help if it were necessary and if the governor wanted it. But I certainly wouldn't be putting my nose where it didn't belong. And that's just one more way that government is just escalating.
Okay, I understand. Um, About 114,000 Americans have died from the coronavirus, and job losses range from 30 to 50 million, according to our best estimates. We don't really know the exact numbers, but regardless, there's been a lot of death, and the uptick in unemployment has been colossal. The Spanish flu, which struck about 100 years ago, had 3 waves, and it was actually the second wave that was the most deadly. There very well could be a second wave of COVID-19 during your presidency. How would a Jorgensen administration respond?
Well, a lot better than this administration responded the first time around. One of the biggest problems we had was the FDA held up testing. And if people had been tested early, we would have known who needed to be quarantined and who didn't. And what a lot of people don't realize is that until 1962, you only had to prove that your drug was safe. After 1962, you have to prove efficacy. So you have to prove that your drug does what it's supposed to do. Now that sounds like a very noble idea. It sounds like that's a good idea. But the problem is it can cost anywhere from $1 million to $1 billion to test each drug, to pass through all the hoops, and it delays the timing. It delays when they're rolled out. So if we look at testing, there were over 60 million companies creating test kits in which the FDA only approved 2 of them. And so you want to know where the other testing kits went? Everywhere else in the world. And we heard about Southeast Asia, how some of those countries were testing their people extensively. They were doing it with American test kits that we weren't allowed to use. So Emergency Powers Act, get rid of that efficacy requirement, get out drugs, get out testing, get out antibody tests, whatever we need to get this thing going. What I wouldn't do is put people under house arrest and tell them that they can't go to their jobs. And finally, I would not take taxpayers' dollars and create a package. You know, it's so ironic that they call it the CARES package. It's like, sure, they care all right about their special interests and lobbyists. I mean, who's it going to? You know, a lot of the big companies. How about we let people decide where the money goes to? And if they want to support their mom and pop stores, that's great.
Okay. I do want to ask a question about that CARES package. As part of it, many Americans received a $1,200 stimulus check. I actually don't like calling it a stimulus check because for most people, it was a relief check at most. But regardless, many Americans received a direct cash payment from the government via the CARES Act. The HEROES Act, which just passed the U.S. House, includes another round of one-time direct cash relief payments. Many feel that a $1,200 check doesn't go far enough, so what's the point? There are also many out there that are calling for repeating cash payments to Americans for the duration of the crisis. And there's many others out there who believe that a permanent universal basic income is needed to help navigate the unique challenges of the 21st century, including automation, offshoring, immigration, tuition and healthcare inflation, and so on. So basically, I want to ask Dr. Jorgensen, what are your thoughts on direct cash payments to Americans?
Well, keep in mind that money has to come from somewhere. So what the government is doing is taxing people, taking that money, and then deciding who they want to give the money to. And it decreases motivation. You know, you mentioned inflation and offshoring and reasons that companies are doing what they're doing. Go back to the tax code. If we have the highest income tax rate in the entire world, of course you're going to go send your company somewhere else where you're not going to be taxed as high. And inflation, I'm glad you brought that up because that's basically a tax that was not ever put into law. It's the government's way of bringing in more money and so they have it to spend on their programs, but people don't realize that basically it's a tax passed in the middle of the night without anybody knowing. Now, and I also would like to point out, yes, people get their $1,200 checks, but why are we talking about bailing out the airlines or these larger companies? And some people say, well, we need airline travel. Well, yeah, we do, but the airplanes aren't going to disappear. The airplanes will still be there. Perhaps the people who had them before didn't manage them as well, so maybe somebody else needs to be managing them. Let's let the people decide with their money instead of government bureaucrats decide with their payments to their friends.
Okay. Um, Moving on to healthcare, I think it's clear to most people that our healthcare system is broken, but what is less clear is how to fix it. The Democrats have been fighting an internal battle, They've been fighting an internal battle over whether a single-payer Medicare for all type system would be the best, or if a public option to compete against the private insurance industry should be created. The Republicans, on the other hand, have largely criticized both these ideas as well as the Affordable Care Act and said they advocate for market-based solutions, but they were unable to pass anything meaningful outside of eliminating the individual mandate when they controlled both chambers of Congress and the White House. So I'd like to ask, where do you stand on the issue of healthcare, and how would you address your position to a polarized Congress?
Yeah, and you make a good point. Basically, it's politics as usual. Even when Republicans had the control, they couldn't get rid of it. So if there is one thing I could get across to every American, one thing, it's that we do not have a free market system. So many times I've heard politicians say, well, obviously the free market isn't working, so what we need to do is we need to go to single payer. No, we have not had a free market system since at least the Second World War. So what has caused prices to go up is the government. And I can give you many cases showing how the free market does such a better job. First of all, if you look at the two most free market, now of course there is no free market in healthcare anywhere in this country, but the two that are most free market are LASIK surgery and cosmetic surgery, because people pay for those on their own. The insurance companies do not pay for that. So what we've seen over the past 20 years is costs going down dramatically and quality going up, because the doctors have to compete. They have to compete with each other on these things, just like when you buy a car. You know, one dealership has to offer lower price than the other dealership so that you buy the car from them. Computers, groceries, gasoline, all of that. That's what we need to do with healthcare. And two other quick things. The state of Indiana had instituted a system in which people were in control of their dollars. Before they instituted it, only 10% of the people bought generic drugs, which that's not surprising. You know, if it's not your own money, what do you care how much it costs? Within a year or two, 90% of the people, the state employees, were choosing generic drugs, and they were glad to do it because they got to keep the savings. And that's the way it should be. If you spend less on gas or groceries, you get to keep the money that's left over, and we don't have that in healthcare. And last, if we look at Singapore, their costs are 75% less than ours. Heart surgery, heart bypass in this country costs $130,000. Over there, it costs $18,000. Because not only are the LASIK surgeons competing against each other, the cardiac surgeons and knee surgeons and everybody else, they're all competing against each other as well.
That's a very interesting point about LASIK surgery and cosmetics. Honestly, I've never really thought about that. I'm definitely going to have to look into that more.
The price drop is amazing, as well as just the technology. And don't go back just to LASIK, go back to the precursor. And that's part of what's so amazing, is that that technology improved so much because it had to, because that's the way it works. You know, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. That's one reason why we have the iPhone, the MacBook, and everything else, is because they were in battle with each other. They each wanted to win, and that's what competition does for us. And may I just make one other point too? If we go under a single payer system, we keep hearing whatever it is, Medicare for all, Medicaid for all. I say it's more like the VA hospital for all. And we know how well that worked out. The only time we've had a monopoly system, it hasn't worked out. And most people don't like monopolies. They don't want corporations having that much power, because they want choice. And yet all of a sudden with healthcare, sure, let's have a monopoly. That's fine.
All right. So this next question actually kind of piggybacks a little bit onto that because it's about competition. Specifically, I wanted to ask, what are your thoughts on free trade? But if you could, in your answer, could you include your views on China, which, as you know, is a country we import a tremendous amount of goods from, despite the fact that many are increasingly viewing China as an adversary. So if you support free trade, which I assume you do, does that include trade with adversarial countries who may have nefarious intent, or would national security concerns outweigh your disposition on trade?
I would suggest that free trade gets rid of the nefariousness that you mentioned.
Mhm.
Uh, when I was in the early 80s, I was driving a Fiat Spider. And I parked in a parking lot, and this older gentleman walked over towards me, and I could see he had a scowl on his face. And I'm sitting there thinking, "Oh my gosh, did I cut you off in traffic?" I didn't think I had, but he came over and he just looks at my car and he says, "I'm a World War II veteran. How dare you drive an Italian car?" And now he's, served our country. I didn't want to get into an argument with him. I'm so glad that he served our country. But what I wanted to say was, you know what? Italy's not going to bomb us if we buy their cars. Look at Japan bombing us in World War II. They're not going to bomb us now since we buy so many Toyotas and Hondas. So to quote somebody famous, to paraphrase it, when goods cross borders, soldiers don't have to.
Mhm. That's a good saying. Good.
And let me mention with China, why are they? Well, first of all, I think that some of this is a bit blown out of proportion because China has shown no aggression. They're not trying to scoop up other countries. They're showing economic aggression, trade aggression. But if we get rid of the tariffs and we allow people to trade freely, then I think that will help relations instead of getting into, notice they even call a tariff war. That's still a war. And again, we're not sending actual soldiers, but we're still sending a war. And what a lot of people don't realize is that a tariff is actually a hidden tax.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Twitter has recently come under fire from the president over their recent decision to begin censoring his tweets. Conservatives in general have been criticizing big tech companies for years now over perceived political discrimination in their censorship activities. Do you believe companies like Twitter, Google, Facebook are so big and so powerful that they should be considered public utilities and regulated in a way that mandates them to abide by First Amendment free speech principles?
I believe the function of government is police, courts, and military. It's to keep us safe. Anything else the free market can do better, such as I mentioned with healthcare. When you've got heart surgery costing $130,000 here and $18,000 over in Singapore, that kind of shows that if we have people competing against each other, that helps. So looking at Facebook, I mean, what they've been doing is stupid, actually. Is they're supposed to be the town square. They're supposed to be where we come together and talk, and they're not. They're censoring us. Now, do I think we should have laws against being stupid? No. Once again, we can have the free market overcome. And if somebody says, "Oh, that sounds very Pollyanna," I'd like to remind you of IBM in the 1980s, or well, before they started before then, but I worked for IBM in the 1980s. The Justice Department tried to break up IBM. And I had a conversation with a socialist who was just so excited, saying, if we can break up IBM, we can break it up into 7 companies, each the size of boroughs, and then boroughs could compete. Now, probably most of your listeners are going, what's a boroughs?
Right.
Boroughs was the major competitor at the time, and they couldn't compete. So even after the Justice Department tried to break them up, and there are all these stories about how the paperwork that they generated, could go to the moon and back. Look who brought down IBM. 2 guys in their garage, forming Apple. And keep in mind, what IBM had going for them was capitalization. They had all of this equipment, and that's why everybody said, well, nobody can compete with IBM because look how big they are. And when you get big, a lot of times you get lazy, and a lot of times you stop appreciating your customers, and maybe you're not as risky with technology. And that's why two guys in their garage, they're the ones who could compete against Apple. So once again, the free market did what the government couldn't.
Mhm. Well, Dr. Jorgensen, we're out of time. I want to thank you very much for joining me, and you're welcome back anytime. And I'm looking forward to speaking with your running mate, Mr. Spike Cohen, next week.
Oh, great. Well, thanks for having me. And I'd like to mention, please come to my website, joj2020.com, if you'd like to check us out. And we are getting so many non-libertarian volunteers in addition to libertarian volunteers. It's been really great. So thanks so much.
Please check our campaign out, people. Please help, volunteer, donate, do whatever you can. And Dr. Jorgensen, thank you again very much.
Great. Have a good evening.
You too. Bye-bye. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I do hope you enjoyed and found value in this interview. If you did, then you're going to want to check back next week, because I'm having on Spike Cohen, who is the Libertarian Party's vice presidential nominee. In other words, Dr. Jorgensen's running mate. So make sure you subscribe, hit the bell icon to turn on notifications. That way you're notified when I upload new videos and you don't miss the interview. Also, consider liking and sharing this video, because this is a new channel, and those two activities will allow me to grow. It's very hard to grow when new, so it's actually kind of a big deal. I want to thank Verily Gray and my newest VIP patron, Jeremy Sammons, for supporting this channel through my Patreon account. Their support helps fund some of the hidden expenses of operating a video podcast. This camera, this microphone, the interface, the computer, none of these things are cheap. I'm also considering buying some YouTube ad space to try to bring in new viewers, and that can also be kind of expensive. So Verily, Jeremy, thank you both very much for your support. It really means a great deal to me. If you would like to learn more about becoming a patron, you can visit patreon.com/ZachSacker. There are multiple support tiers to choose from, all with their own unique perks. For becoming a VIP patron, Jeremy gets to choose a song, any song, for me to cover and record and possibly embarrass myself on this channel for you all to see. I don't know what song it is yet, but hopefully it won't be anything too torturous. We will find out. You'll also be joining me on the program in the near future, which is a perk of being a VIP patron, but Jeremy and I were actually discussing this well before he became a patron. We are actually working together on an awesome new project that I just wish I could talk about now, but I can't. We're not ready to unveil it. When we are, he'll be coming on the program to discuss it in detail. So, again, subscribe, turn on the notifications so that you don't miss that conversation. Jeremy and I met through the Yang Gang Roundtable, which is another podcast that we're both speakers on. The Yang Gang Roundtable airs multiple podcasts each week with different speakers, all with a different political ideology, despite their gravitation to Andrew Yang and the Yang Gang. So that's all for today. Thank you for tuning in, and once again, thank you Verily and Jeremy for being such great supporters. Always remember that it's not left, not right, but forward, and I hope you all have a great night.